All right, Africa. Imperialism in Africa, anyway. Remember back, we're going to play catch up and then go forward again. Remember the voices from the past? This is a map of the voices from the past, so I just want to make sure we're setting the stage. Notice that the boundaries are nowhere close to where the Europeans, when we look back to the imperialism maps that you did. Okay. Notice that some of the kingdoms overlap. That's going to be really important to notice as we go forward, okay, to talk about some of those problems that we've had. Okay. This is 1800. Notice what starts to happen. We've got control along the coast of Africa. Why do we have control along the coast of Africa? What did you learn?
Waterway and trade.
Waterway and trade. So most of the Egypt, the Nile River, is all about trying to get to the Red Sea and over to China, right? And we've got that, what I talked about before was the portage here, right? Okay, the portage where you have to get off the Nile River and then to the Red Sea, somewhere in there. You've also got all along here, we have ports for stopping and resupplying ships as they're sailing all the way around Africa to China, right? So if we've got that piece going around, there's also one other piece that we have to talk about. Well, that's my last piece, is you've also got the Spanish, Portuguese, French, and a lot of the Dutch. These areas around here were for the slave trade. Now, one thing that a lot of 7th graders and 8th graders miss with the slave trade is the people that they were bringing over from Africa were not people that were just stealing out of beds. I need to go back here. What's happening, notice that the kingdoms are overlapping or very close to each other. What would that tell you going back to even the feudal system in Europe? What's happening? There's conflict within the African kingdoms. So the African kingdoms, the African kings would get the conquest. When they win, they get the warriors that they've captured. Now you either keep them as prisoners of war or you sell them off to the white man for trade for things that I don't have. So instead of trading natural resources, they're trading human resources for natural or capital resources for their own kingdom. Those people were put on ships and then shipped over to the Indies or the United States. Well, I'm sorry, the British colonies in the Americas, because there was no United States at that time. Yes?
Why did the Africans who captured them as prisoners or just use them as slaves for their own?
Sometimes they did, but it was also easy. You could get more stuff from the whites. Does that make sense? So the resource, so here we are. Obviously, the slaves are the first major resource to come out of Africa, human resource. Why not Native Americans? Compared to Africans, they were weak, physically weak. They were also, their immune system was weak. If we go back to bacteria and viruses, where did most viruses and major plague things originate? Africa. How is the immune system of those Africans? Greater. They can withstand the white man's diseases, like smallpox and those other things. And because they've already had it, their immune system is so much greater. White man disease from Europe shows up here in the Americas, and it decimates the populations that have never seen those viruses or bacteria before. So you bring in something that can withstand them, and that is the Africans. One, their immune system is larger, but two, genetically, they're also physically stronger and bigger. And remember who they were taking. They were taking the warriors, the biggest and the strongest of their kingdoms. Well, and then we use the same thing we did with the dogs, right? Over time, over many, many generations, what did we do to wolves? We turned them into pets and domestic animals. So what did we do with some of those Africans? Well, we took the best of the stock and then we bred them with the best of the stock and literally bred them almost into a new species. Why? Do you think it's an accident that many African Americans in our today's society are athletes, are the biggest and the strongest? Is it an accident? No. It was purposeful. Since 1880, how many generations can you use and build a new genetically better, stronger, physically, taller traits in humans? It was an unintended experiment. Just like the dogs and the wolves. Literally the same thing. We genetically modified a species of humans to be better. That book that I told you about, The Gold Rising, or The Red Rising, it's literally the same thing. It's pretty cool. So Europeans came in. Now we have the 1700s, the need for, or 1800. 1800, the need for resources increases. That's why we needed the labor. India. 8th graders, you're going to understand this more than the 7th graders. 7th graders next year, I'm going to refer back to this and you're going to go, oh, that's what you meant. 8th graders are like, now I get it. We called the French and Indian War in 1763. The United States and Great Britain wins, but at the same time, they also won control over India. Huh? It's a war that was fought in the United States, but yet control of India was there. Prior to 1763, in the 1700s, India's ports were controlled by France. Okay, now are you starting to see this? 8th graders are like, oh, I get it. Okay, France and Great Britain were at odds with each other, and it was all about 8th graders. You remember what the War of 1763 was about? You don't remember? Oh, I'm so disappointed. That was like less than 200 days ago. Remember the proclamation of 1763 where nobody could go beyond the Appalachian Mountains? And then they started to go beyond and they were in the territory, in the French territory, and the French and Indians were like, hey, you can't do that. And British said, don't do that. And then we said, well, we're going west anyway. And then war broke out between France and Great Britain and the Indians and the colonies. So when you say the French and Britain, remember that they were British. All of those Americans were going west. So that caused that war, right? But Great Britain won. Great Britain wins, you get the spoils of the war. Basically what we said is, okay, we won't go past the proclamation of 1763 line, which for 7th graders, the colonists were not allowed to go west of the Appalachian Mountain because of the result of this war. And we would get, the British Empire would get control of India, and we'd leave France to have what we now call the Midwest. You guys, 8th graders, remember that a little bit more now? Now, back then I said, hey, keep that in mind because next year we'll talk about it again. Guess what? I hold true. Great Britain, with what happened in the United States, which wasn't the United States at that time, gets control over India. The British East India Company, remember we talked about the 4 ways that they took control over different places? This is the company, okay? It wasn't governmental rule, it wasn't settler rule, this was the economic rule. The British East India Company takes over India through treaties, warring princes, that type of thing. Okay? So a company literally starts to take over the political realm of India, and they make a ton of money. Remember and I know 7th graders, you'll know this too, the Boston Tea Party? Do you remember where all the tea came from? India. It was a British East Indian Company ships that had all the tea. All that money to take it from India over to the Americas got dumped overboard, and it was the British East India Company that lost money. It wasn't the Crown. So the Americans, if they were to, or the revolutionists, if they were really trying to hurt the crown, they chose the wrong way to do it. But it was the symbolic gesture of it that was more at stake than it was the actual hurting the crown.
Why didn't anyone try to like take over India since they had all the resources? Like,
France did. France had control of all the ports, but they lost it.
oh.
Because they lost the French and Indian War in the what is now the United States to Great Britain and the colonists. Remember, George Washington was fighting for the crown during the French and Indian War. He helped win. That's how he got so much status as a general. And then he rebelled against his own king during the Revolutionary War. Okay. But during that time, he helped win the French and Indian War. George Washington helps win the French and Indian War, helps Great Britain defeat France, and in spoils of the war, they let France stay in the Americas as long as Great Britain gets India, part of the peace treaty. Companies ran India as a profit-making operation. Okay, so we talked about those things again. What were they getting from the resources of the people? Tea, indigo. What's indigo?
Blue dye.
Blue dye. Your jeans that you're wearing right now are probably dyed with indigo. Okay, those of you are actually wearing blue jeans. Coffee, cotton, jute. What's jute? Rope. It's that really scratchy rope. Okay, the back side of your carpet. You guys have pulled up carpet before, the real scratchy stuff. That's jute. Okay, it's super strong, but very tough to work with, I guess. Okay, and then one other crop was opium. Opium. Poppies.
I read about that in the thing, in the pink timeline thing.
Yeah. So something about the opium war. We'll get to it. So Indians were high-handed. In other words, this goes back to the white man's burden, being high-handed, ignored culture, everything. It was just about their resources and that they were there to be conquered. They tried to recreate the British way of life. When we say somebody tries to recreate something, what do we call that? When you try and be like somebody else. Not social Darwinism. I'll give you a hint.
Conform.
Kind of like conform. The Native Americans tried to do it. But what is that word that does this? Huh?
I don't look like.
It's kind of like imitation.
I even remember these.
Shall I let you stew on that? The Native Americans tried to do this to be more white-like. They wanted to be like that. I'll come back to it because you'll see it. Yes.
Tell us the word. This is going to be killing me. The entire power.
Assimilate. Where you try to assimilate to be the same as. Okay. So the Indians, the real Indians from India, tried to recreate British way of life. They tried to assimilate into the British culture to be like. So if you are being like and you're acting like, then you should be treated like. And that's what the Cherokee tried to do. They tried to be like and act like so that they would be treated like. But were they? No. The British hired sepoys, or what we would call local troops, to fight for them. We would call them, you would hire the militia. They called them sepoys. And this is really important. That's why it's underlined and bolded. Well, why is it bolded? I'll explain that in a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about the British East India Company real quick. The British take control. The activity is mostly limited to the coastal regions, mostly for shipping. mid-1700, empires broke into smaller states. Okay, so East India, because India's political climate was already breaking apart, they were broken into kingdoms, if you will, led by Rajas. Sorry. Basically, king princes. I said that right? So, they manipulated rulers of these states. They took these Rajas and they manipulated them into thinking they were in control, but they were literally under the British control. And if you need to keep your throne, somebody else is going to throw you out, so you need our protection to keep your control. The best example I have of this that's really is in the Indiana Jones movies and the Temple of Doom. How many of you have seen that one? Go back and watch it again, because remember they're sitting at the Indian prince's table and it's the little guy and most of the people there are British, and now you're going, neural pathways are sparking and you're going, I now see the connection. Why were they there? Okay, they played rulers against each other to keep India in chaos. If India is in chaos, then if I'm the strong one, then I keep the chaos. So if I create the chaos and put it away, what does that make me look like?
It's like Syndrome from The Incredibles.
It is. I create the chaos to put it away, and now I look like the good guy. So India, the East India Company creates the chaos, then says, you need me to keep the peace of the chaos that I just created. So now I look like the good guy. Each company's army took over much of India. The funny thing is, most of the people who did the warring and the fighting were the sepoys. So the British controlled the troops who were fighting each other from the same country. So if you think about it, it's kind of like the British had this marionette puppet show going on with the Indians that were already there. So here's what the British East India Company owns or controls. So they started to make changes. First, we're going to teach them the English language. They're going to get rid of the customs, like the sati. Anybody want to tell me what the sati is? Anybody know what the custom of sati is? You got it. The sati is the one where if the husband dies, the woman throws herself onto the funeral pile alive and burns alive. Remember reading about that? It was on the WebQuest. It was part of the WebQuest. So the British went, dude, that is so wrong. You are not allowed to do that anymore. The practice of Hindu widows throwing themselves on the funeral pyre. Okay, so I guess you could have read ahead of that. They destroyed the society. They brought Christianity to spread Christianity and to get rid of the multi-god Hinduism. They began to believe the British were trying to destroy their society. So if you were there and somebody came in and said, no, Muslim or Hinduism is the way of it, and you need to get rid of Christianity, you'd be like, oh, you're trying to destroy my society. Well, yeah, think of it the other way around. They thought the British wanted to eliminate Indian customs, Hinduism completely. Relationships between the Indians and the British increased and became more strained. Can you see how that might just happen? So, real quick, I'm going to let you think about it, and then you're going to talk with a neighbor real quick. So, what viewpoint might each of these following people have taken in the British India? Okay, so we're going to talk about a textile manufacturer in Britain. So this first one is you live in Great Britain and you're looking for that jute and the cotton and that type of thing from India. a British railroad executive in India. You're making the railroads to get the materials in and out to the ports. What about an Indian official that is in the civil service? You're a officer in the British Army. Okay, but you're Indian. Okay, you're part of those sepoys. What about a Sikh soldier? Okay, you're part Muslim, part Hindu. You've kind of done things your own way for a while. Or a Maharaja educated in Great Britain, and you're in control of a small kingdom in India with it. Real quick, write down, how might you view the rule of British in India? Write each one of those down. Give me a quick response. We've only got about 4 minutes to finish this.